We are live. He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman. Hey, folks, this is Mind Your Banners for August 27th, 2025. Just a shade before 9 p.m. And that date means what you all think it means, which means football's back. Mike, football's back.
It is.
It's so back. Did you watch any of the Week 0 games last week at all?
I did not.
You did? All right. I got a little Farmageddon. That game got pretty sloppy. To be fair, it's very wet and cold in Ireland pretty much year-round, even in August. And then I was admittedly burning back a cigar that I brought from Puerto Rico watching Stanford, Hawaii on my back deck last Saturday night.
So, it was not an impressive Week 0 slate.
I mean, the thing is, they really aren't very often. Like, sometimes you get an exciting game or two, and Farmageddon was exciting. I mean, and that was two ranked teams. The Big 12. Listen, this podcast will go cast a much more specific glance on Indiana than it will the Big 12. But I've never seen
only Big 12 talk tonight.
I have never seen a conference where you could convince me on blind resumes, coaches, quarterbacks, whatever, that like 9 of the teams in the conference are just the same team. They all have a 6th round pick quarterback. They've all got a coach who looks like he sleeps on a bed of empty Celsius cans. The starting middle linebacker is a former walk-on. It describes, I would say, solidly 60 to 70% of that conference. It's remarkable. The good folks joining us in Mind Your Banners HQ did not come here to hear about Big 12 football, though at some point this season they came here to obviously preview what is, I think it's fair to say, the most anticipated season in IU football history at this point. We are going to do a whole bunch of stuff, rolling through some previews, some predictions that you and I have both laid out, some over-unders that you put together for us before the show. But we did want to start with one piece of news. You covered virtually Lewis Moore's hearing today in Texas, trying to argue for one more year of eligibility. Just kind of, a lot of people will probably have seen your tweets and the John Wayne references contained within, but just kind of just kind of catch people up on sort of where that stands and in particular how it's going to affect both Indiana's near-term plan and long-term plan, at least as best we can know. Obviously, we'll debate sort of what Indiana's.
Yeah, I think it's an interesting debate. So it was a hearing essentially scheduled initially to. The initial TRO they won was 14 days, and this would have been the hearing was essentially to go over. He was fighting for an injunction that would have lasted till the trial, which would have been next year at some point, in theory, and so he would have basically been okay for the whole season. They never really got to that discussion. The NCAA filed a motion to dismiss the case over jurisdictional issues. Boiled down to the NCAA doesn't think the state court has jurisdiction based on various legal arguments that, essentially they have no standing. Lewis Moore is based in Indiana. The organization is based in Indiana. The counter was that, they have member schools in Texas and they do huge business in Texas. The Final Four is in Texas. And so that should be enough to kind of get over a threshold. The judge sort of seemed sympathetic or was listening. I thought bought the NCAA's sort of analysis, but allowed discovery to essentially determine the scope of the business in Texas. And I'm not sure how this will all go because they requested all documents and contracts for individuals and businesses from the NCAA within any individual or business in Texas, including revenue share agreements for the last 18 months. It's we'll see what happens. They can object to sort of the scope of things, and that could be limited. But then what ultimately happened was the judge ruled he can extend this temporary TRO for 14 days, and that's what he did. And they'll have another hearing on September 10th at 9 a.m. So sort of to kind of kicks the can down the road a little bit for 2 weeks, clears more to play in theory for week 1 and week 2. And then, we'll see, he's still seeking that. He needs that injunction to be eligible for the rest of the 2025 season. Now, in terms of how it affects this game, I think it's interesting because Curt Cignetti has a choice. Obviously, he can go go with the best player. And if that was Lewis Moore these 2 weeks, he can do that and start him and play him and revisit the issue once the final decision's made for was that Indiana State game. But alternatively, do you run the risk then of playing more, taking away sort of snaps from Byron Baldwin? Well, he could be sort of, I think he'd be the guy, next up to sort of get seasoning, be ready, because I think you want to have, your sort of best lineup. And for that obviously we've mentioned the week 4 pivotal game matchup against Illinois, because I don't think you really know what way this goes. Like, there's no tea leaves to read. I mean, like I said, Judge was kind of sympathetic, but what if these documents have arguments that sort of convince him that it meets this threshold? Curt Cignetti not getting a legal wrangling. Maybe he talks to the lawyer representing Moore or something, but the idea that, totally uncertain what happens with him after the second week of the season. So do you get Baldwin ready and have him have these 3 games to sort of work out? He's a true freshman, did enroll early, but you don't want to throw him in the lineup, I think, with only 1 game of experience in that Illinois game if Moore is ruled ineligible or doesn't gain the eligibility. How would you look at that? Because I think it's really interesting.
Well, I think that the first question I would ask, just very briefly, and I think I know the answer, but there's really not anything on the line at this point for Lewis Moore. Like, just in terms of, like, he can't, if he doesn't get the year of eligibility, he doesn't get the year of eligibility. So, like, if he, at least as I process it, I don't see, and correct me if I'm wrong here, but I don't see any like risk he takes by playing these first 2 games and then finding out the TRO is
in terms of like Indiana, like that as a program would be at risk.
Well, yeah, I mean, a judge has declared him eligible for 2 weeks, so I don't see how Indiana would take a hit here. And I don't, he's arguing for essentially his last year of eligibility, so I don't see that Moore would essentially lose anything if he somehow ran afoul, if he played these 2 games and then did not get the wider win.
Retroactively, like if he's not eligible after the 2 weeks, doesn't retroactively make these 2 games he wasn't eligible. Like the judges ruled, like, he's essentially eligible for these 2 games because there's a temporary restraining order on the rules being applied in the waiver. So like he's fine for these 2 weeks. So I don't think it's a matter of Indiana running risks of the rules. I just think it's sort of more of a debate on the field about what's the best way to approach it, because it's not like an injury where you can kind of maybe see like, oh, he's going to be ready, Moore's going to be ready. Like, you really don't know what his eligibility is after these 2 weeks because it's up to the courts essentially. In these arguments, obviously, they had to go through mediation that didn't produce anything. And I don't think the NCAA is going to suddenly back off, because in court today, they said basically as a means of consistency, and they've won a lot of these cases, that they've not gone over here. These have been happening all over the country. As a matter of consistency, they're going to fight this. And so, like I said, what do you do as Curt Cignetti to sort of set him? Obviously you want to play your best players. You want to win the game this weekend against Old Dominion, but it's at a position where the next guy up could really use the extra playing time if he's going to be your guy come week 3 and week 4. Obviously, the second of those games is obviously the more challenging.
I think that, I think if you're Curt Cignetti, you probably do just kind of have to plan for life without him. And I know that's a bit harsh. Like, I know that's difficult, but I think your point is valid, especially with a young player. Like, I think it would be different if
you had like 2
4th, 5th year players there and they were kind of like relatively equal in level, if you understand what I'm saying. Like, if you sort of felt like you could trade them in and out, or even if Moore was the clear number 1, but then like the number 2 was someone like Josh Sanguinetti has been for Indiana the last 3 years, where just a solid steady play, you kind of always know what you're going to get from someone like that. Then I think you could sort of roll with Moore and then figure out what it looks like the other side of these 2 games. I think the X factor is, and this is also, let's be clear, presuming that's where Indiana wants to use Byron Baldwin, because I think there have been some sort of suggestions that he might be a fit down in the rover position, but that's also a lot to put on a freshman. So, the thing is that, and I don't mean to get tangential, I've seen that go both ways. Like Indiana put Marcelino Ball in that role, or a role similar to that in Tom Allen's defense, and Allen's 1 year as defensive coordinator as a true freshman. And it actually kind of liberated him, because it was just sort of like, hey, listen, you're just here to go find the ball, go make plays. Like you don't have to. We're not going to the reading coverages, communicating different things. That's going to be on somebody else. But you get to be just sort of this roving playmaker who has this remit to just be one of the best athletes on the field and just express that in whatever makes sense from that role. On the other hand, I think Indiana probably lays a lot on Terry Smith last season when it moves him down to that role, because it says you're a senior, you have played a ton of football. We can put that, we can put a lot sort of on your plate and you can handle it. I think if that is where Indiana sees Baldwin, and both of us, I think, have independently heard some really good feedback about Baldwin through fall camp to this point, and even going back to the spring, if that is where Indiana sees Baldwin, then I think it is a difficult decision that I suspect Curt Cignetti may see the way you are, I think, sort of seeing it here, which is because it's such a young player and because you have the relative luxury of these 3 games at the beginning of the year. And of course, you don't want to underestimate ODU or Kennesaw State or whatever, but it's not what Illinois is going to be. It's not what Iowa is going to be, because of the value Baldwin would get out of those games. I think there's a compelling case to be made for, Lewis Moore gets some snaps. You want him to be game fit as much as humanly possible, but yeah, maybe you lean more toward that younger player, trying to flatten his learning curve as much as possible.
Yeah, and one of the viewers mentioned Boykin, and I think we're presuming. Essentially, Mary Farrell mentioned specifically about Baldwin working at Rover. I think the top 3 in an ideal world would be the 3 veterans in some combination. With Farrell, we know, returning at his spot at safety where he was moved halfway through. I think you meant Terry Jones, not Terry Smith last year. But the idea is, whether Moore's at safety or Rover, it doesn't really matter. It's the same principles. The idea that you've got to get Baldwin ready if he's ruled ineligible for the start of the Big Ten season. And this is sort of, like I said, I think the perfect ramp up. But it's a tough choice because, you're punishing Moore. And then if he's eligible, does he lose his spot because he had to go through this? But I mean, it is what it is. Just the uncertainty of it and the unique nature of it. He lived to fight another day in court today. Obviously, he didn't lose his eligibility, but it's a tough spot to be in. Because like I said, it's something you can't predict. Whereas you got, if it's an injury, a trainer can be like, look, 2 weeks at the outside, or this is the best case. These are the clear worst case scenarios. We just don't have that. It's tough. And I think, like I said, if I'm a coach, just the idea of getting him ready, I think with the schedule they have, I think it's the probably cleanest thing, because you can always go back to Moore if he wins in court, and you think he's the best player. Well, then you got Baldwin getting 2 weeks of big time experience, and then it gives you kind of more options down the line. Because like you mentioned, Terry Jones, he'd enter the starting line. They did make a change at midseason. It was one of the biggest changes sort of defensively they made, in terms of, Hardy switching with Isaiah Jones, and then Farrell moving from Rover to safety. Those were kind of the 2 big position changes last year at mid-year for the defense. So they did do this last year, moved pieces around the secondary, during the season.
I think this is also probably one of those conversations that's a little bit easier in a revenue sharing era, where if you can look at Lewis Moore and say, listen, yeah, it's a tough beat, but at the same time, you got more than just the college experience, which is important too, don't get me wrong. But you can look at Lewis Moore and say, you still got taken care of in a way financially. Let's put it this way. This sort of thing in some form or fashion happens in the pros all the time. It just does, where there's an injury or a suspension, some kind of unexpected absence that opens a door for a player that maybe nobody quite saw as being as ready or as talented as they turned out to be. And, but the sort of the turnabout is that the player that got supplanted is still getting compensated. Is still, now I understand in the NFL, for example, that player can eventually go into free agency and try to find another opportunity to get that job back. But
but it used to be in college, eligibility was all you had. So if you
right,
lost,
no, I think it's I think it just makes that conversation just that little bit easier, maybe, if that makes sense.
And it just for Cignetti, I did ask him about this very sort of case. How do you sort of plan? And he declined he declined to answer the question. He said they'll handle it as they see fit. If anybody was wondering about what the response was from the coach this week.
Let's move to the portion of this that is a little bit more pre-scripted, which is talking about specifically what's coming here, what's coming down the track. I don't think it is unfair, and I think you and I have both approached this sort of idea in different ways, to call this the most anticipated season in program history. I think it's pretty clear that that's what this is. I think, Indiana as an athletics department, as a fan base, has been given in its modern history reason to sort of believe in football again. Bill Mallory had some teams that, competed for Big Ten titles deep into November at different times. Obviously, Indiana's had a Heisman runner-up in Anthony Thompson. You had Antoine Randall. You've had, the excitement coming out of Tom Allen's 8-4 season, then followed by the COVID year. But Indiana had never done anything like what it did last year. And because, and you wrote a really good story about this in the last few days, because both in terms of like the physical personnel, and I think also kind of as a natural follow-on from that, because of the process, because that meant the process was sustained, there is just a lot of belief that I think there's a level of belief, a level of excitement, a level of ambition, a level of anticipation that I don't think this program, whether you're talking about fans or even internally, has ever felt like it had the, sort of the permission to feel. And I think it very much does now. And again, there's a lot of different things that go into that. There's players and coaches that are back. There's additions that have been made in the portal and so forth. But I mean, this is, by I think just about any measure, the most anticipated season in program history. And it's really going to be fascinating. Even some of these games in the beginning that Indiana should win, I think to see how Indiana handles that as a team, as a department, as a fan base. Frankly, Curt Cignetti is still sort of fighting to get the ODU game sold out. It's not. I think I want to say last check, under 5,000 tickets left, but it seems like it's going to be a pretty close run thing if Indiana is going to make it a full-on sellout. This is, if so much of last year was uncharted territory for Indiana, so is this, and that's going to make this a fascinating watch.
Well, because I think the way to picture it would be like, what if we were having this conversation now? They were looking to replace Bryant Haynes. If he leaves, maybe one or two of the guys under him go with him. Or you lose, a Shanahan instead of a Censari. Maybe that would have been an easy one to swap out if, you just promote the one. But, you lose, a coordinator or both of them. And then you lose, half of those guys that got all Big Ten honors. You lose a guy like Kamara and Fisher. I don't think you can have the kind of confidence. Like, they went into the offseason. Really, the quarterback was the kind of the key domino, that if you replaced him, you were in a good spot because of what you all brought back. And I think it just framed the discussion so differently. Like, look, they brought I think it was 8 all Big Ten guys back. 2 of those guys run special teams, but those were key pieces. They all could have, he mentioned Curt Cignetti at Big Ten Media Days, and he told me in a sit down I had with him, he had multiple players get offered from other teams to enter the portal. And at Big Ten Media Days, I think he said 1.5 was an offer that he knew of specifically. And so they rebuffed those. They rebuffed the NFL. I think all of them had kind of a tough path to the NFL, but they could have tried it. I mean, a lot of players do, but I think the conversation changed once you got through spring.
I think even that speaks to a certain commitment in an NIL level from your fan base that Indiana wouldn't have been able to get without last season, that some of these players stay because the financial opportunity here is worthwhile, but it's only worthwhile because the fan base, the department is going to fund revenue sharing to a certain level, and the fan base, the donor base, engages in the NIL piece of it at such a high level that it's worthwhile for a lot of those guys to come back.
And it was loyalty. I asked Cignetti that straight up. I said, do you feel like, because a lot of those guys were JMU guys, not all of them, but a lot of them were, that played a role in them maybe that $1.5 million was more than what they were making, or they could have gotten more than that. Like, do you think that they gave you, I mean, you picked a lot of these guys when they did not have offers and you've built them up? And he said, absolutely. Like, I mean, I think it did play a role too, to your point. like Indiana ponied up money. Like, I mean, especially with the coaching staff, Derek Owings got multiple raises. Brian Haynes got multiple raises. Like, those are things that speaks to a department that is committed. But on the player side, I think loyalty and coaching side, loyalty played a role. And so I think that just changed the kind of the complexion of the conversation, and it made it so, we'll get into the kind of the schedule and predictions and playoff. But I mean, it's hard not to talk about them as a playoff contender because they had so few question marks once they got one of the top rated transfer quarterbacks.
And I also think, and listen, I mean, I have been guilty of beating this particular horse to death over the course of the offseason, but I don't think it's unfair. I mean, like Pete Thamel, I saw this week, picked Indiana to go back to the playoff, and he cited Fernando Mendoza combined with Curt Cignetti's track record with quarterbacks as the reason. Like, he said, the reason I'm giving Indy, and I think he picked them as the last team in his sort of preseason playoff projection, but he said it's about what, pro people, what scouts, what what draft analysts, quarterback analysts think of Mendoza, and it's also about what quarterbacks have been capable of coming from a transfer situation, or even at times, you want to go all the way back to his time at Elon, a true freshman situation, what quarterbacks have been capable of inside Cignetti's system, even though it's different types of quarterbacks. Sometimes it's true pocket passers, like Indiana had to use Curtis Rourke last year. Sometimes it's guys who are much more mobile. Sometimes it's guys who are, it's, if you want to use the term, dual threat, the guys that kind of bridge that gap. Cignetti will tell you that when he started at Indiana, Pennsylvania, it was a rush-heavy offense. They threw the ball like 10, 12 times a game. Now they are one of the most sort of pass-dominant teams in the country a lot of the time, certainly at least in terms of who they build the offense around. And yet, listen, quarterback's always going to be a big question mark until it's answered, even if you get a proven transfer, even if you get, a great staff around him, whatever. But it's both what Mendoza did at Cal, the way you were able to chart his progress over 2 seasons as a Power 4/5 starting quarterback, and then also what we have seen this staff, starting with and then moving down from the head coach, do in terms of taking a transfer and building, or a true freshman, and building the offense around their strengths and to accentuate their strengths. And so I think it's both what Indiana's gotten back, and it's also, again, going back to that idea of, consistency and institutional knowledge. You're able to sort of buy into the whole process because the process remains. It's not just like you said. Brian Haynes could have left, taken a couple guys with him. Shanahan could have left, taken a couple guys with him, and suddenly, hey, Cignetti's process remains the same, but he's got 3 new assistants on offense or on defense, learning the way he wants it done, learning how to sort of succeed within the framework that he creates as head coach. You don't have to worry about that here. I know Indiana's got a new quarterbacks coach, but everything else, I mean, including, like, if you want to go all the way to the strength staff, the recruiting staff, everything else remains stable. And that consistency, I think, is why you feel like the ceiling is maybe even a little bit higher competitively in year 2 than it was in maybe not in wins and losses. The schedule we'll talk about in a minute is a little bit more difficult, but in terms of just the raw ability and potential of the team is a little bit higher.
And not to shortchange Tino Sansari, because by all accounts, he was a fantastic quarterbacks coach that really connected with Curtis and the guys in the past he has. But if there was a position coach that maybe not expendable is not the right word, but that you could replace and sort of still maintain a sort of consistent level, I mean, it was quarterbacks, right? Because it's a room with 3 voices in there. I feel like, Curt Cignetti has a big say. Obviously, Mike Shanahan. So I feel like that's not that, like, if you were going to lose Brian Haynes, I think it throws everything off. And it's just, I feel like keeping those coordinators was so important. And to your point about Mendoza, like, I don't think, like, if he does what he did last year while avoiding maybe some of the sack numbers, and that has a lot to do with the offensive line in front of him, like, I think that gets Indiana to where it wants to go. I think their ceiling is obviously higher if he hits sort of all these projections, some of these projections that have him as a first round pick. but I don't think he necessarily has to hit that level for this team to maintain the success it had last year. Because like if you look at his numbers, they weren't, you know, what it completed 68% of his passes, 3,000 yards, 16 touchdowns, 6 interceptions. I think that gets you, you know, Curtis Rourke obviously had more volume in scoring, but it's about the same. And I think that gets you where you want to go. If he's even better, I think that puts you in kind of a different conversation and maybe threatens the Oregons and the Penn States of the world. But as is, if he you know, his baseline is where
I think what you're trying to say is it's not hard to imagine Indiana as a playoff contender with a good Fernando Mendoza.
Right, not a great.
If he is, and I mean, I saw a projection I think today or yesterday with him as the number 1 overall pick, and you know, we don't need to get like that far ahead. But if he is that kind of quarterback, that's how Indiana goes up to dreamland level. Is if Fernando like the maybe the best placeholder for it is if Fernando Mendoza is a top 5 pick level quarterback all year long, and everything else from last season that you feel like you can count on from Indiana just generally stays where it was, then December 6th, 2025, Indiana fans might be living the dream of 2 p.m. tip-off at Gainbridge Fieldhouse, 8 p.m. kickoff at Lucas Oil Stadium.
Yeah, no, absolutely. And that's kind of my point. Like, if his baseline is what it was last year and they stay healthy, you know, obviously if the defense falls apart because Kamara gets injured and Fisher gets injured, then these are different discussions. But everything equal, like this team's probably where it wants to be if Fernando Mendoza is good but not great, like you said. And so maybe that's a good point. The schedule comment here would be a good transition to our schedule positions or predictions, which are very aligned. We are going to sink or swim together.
I like that. What was the old Ben Franklin line? We must surely hang together, or we will all hang separately. Do we have so? I think we both predicted 10-2. Do we have the same wins and losses? Okay, so basically it's easier to do the losses. They lose to Oregon, they lose to Penn State, they win every
the only
difference
other game. Technically, we're getting deep into the weeds of our stories. I don't know if you read mine. Doesn't sound like you did, but you had
probably busy chasing someone telling them to put their pants on.
And it wasn't even your kids. You had the Penn State game being closer, and I think Oregon's the more realistic upset possibility.
That's interesting because I mean, Oregon is number 1. It's a big travel thing. Number 2, I think even if Oregon's got a lot more to replace, there's probably an athletic level at Oregon, and maybe this is also just like experience bias. But I've seen Indiana be competitive at Penn State. I've seen bad Indiana teams be competitive in State College. Now, what's interesting is, and obviously Oregon gets a bye, so does Indiana leading into that game. But everybody in both of those games, Indiana's coming off of the Illinois-Iowa turnaround and then the bye. Oregon's coming off a trip, I believe, to Penn State. And then in the Penn State game, Indiana's coming off the trip to Maryland, which at least on paper, Indiana should win that game. Penn State is coming off Ohio State. So, like, you are getting in both of those cases an opponent that is, and Oregon will have a bye, so it'll be a little bit different, but an opponent that has probably just come down off the high, for better or worse, of one of their other recognized biggest games of the year. Now, the flip side is the schedule, you know, for example, it might do Illinois some good that they play Duke before they play Indiana, whereas the best team Indiana plays is probably ODU. You know, you get a little bit of a better look at kind of where you are and what you are and what needs to improve. You also maybe have to put a little bit more on film so we can overthink these things. But I think it is interesting. I'm almost certain of this, that Oregon's game before Indiana is Penn State. They do have the bye. And Penn State's game before Indiana is Ohio State. And that's the one where, again, when I've seen Indiana anecdotally be competitive in State College, it has often been when Indiana was the opponent after a big game. Indiana was Penn State's opponent after an Ohio State or a Michigan, or whether it was at home or on the road, whether they won or they lost. It is kind of been an equalizer for Indiana in the past. And the other thing I would say too is, by the time you get to that point in the year, nobody's a mystery anymore. Whereas, like, you might still be, Oregon might still just be digging into like the more, innovative sections of the playbook. Okay, they had the Penn State game, but like by the time you get to November, everybody kind of is what they're going to be for the most part. And so you get a longer look and better prep and maybe more detailed preparation. I might also just have a little bit more, and this isn't to say I don't respect James Franklin. I might also just have a little bit more respect for Dan Lanning.
Whoa.
I think they're both really good coaches.
That's fired.
I think I might put Lanning ever so slightly ahead of Franklin. Either way, I mean, it can go to be in fairness to me. I think I had Oregon like by 11 and Penn State by a touchdown. So,
and I didn't look at much at the schedules. But you mentioned Penn State. Penn State actually has 3 of 4 on the road, including a West Coast trip with a bye in that stretch before Indiana. So I mean, they will have traveled quite a bit leading up to that game. My thing with Oregon is just the assumption that they will be able to sort of pick up where they left off the last couple of years with a vastly different quarterback situation. Like they signed like the most experienced transfers in each of those cycles, essentially. Bo Nix 3 years ago now, and Dylan Gabriel last year, and that's a very different ask than Dante Moore, who got some starts at UCLA. And so I just think people are assuming that they're just going to roll. And so I just think that's tough to ask a quarterback. Didn't play much last year. Got a handful of starts, 9 starts, I think, for UCLA. I just think that the experience that they have for Penn State, obviously bring back quarterback, one of the 2 top running backs. It's just a lot that they have there and fewer question marks. I just, maybe Dante Moore is great, but before the season, I don't know. I just think it's tough to sort of judge them and say, like you said, they have obviously a lot of talent around him, but having the amount of experience they had at quarterback was a huge benefit.
Let me ask you. Let me kind of frame this in a couple different ways. So we've talked about here. We both have them losing Oregon and Penn State and winning every other game. We've kind of, I guess, determined between us, or at least we have each presented our case for why we think that's the more likely, the timing of the schedule or whatever. If we can recognize Iowa and Illinois as the next 2 most difficult games for Indiana, which one do you think is likelier? If I told you Indiana's going to lose one of them, which one is likelier in your mind and why?
That's a tough one. I think Iowa's offense is look, they got a quarterback, this South Dakota State transfer.
Yeah, Mark Gronowski.
10,000 plus yards. I think he set a record or tied the record for FCS wins, career wins for a quarterback. It's just incredible resume. Does not have much in terms of talent, sort of skill guys around him. And then obviously you mentioned Cignetti's history of offensive success. Iowa's recent history has sort of been the opposite. And how do you sort of say like they're going to break the cycle? I think maybe you probably say Illinois, even though it's a home game, because their ceiling's a little bit higher with what the percentage of guys that they brought back and their production. Having a returning starter at quarterback makes a difference. But you're reluctant to do that because it is at home. But, Iowa, I was looking back, Indiana has been competitive there in over the during your tenure here on the beat. So it's not a place that they have.
It's a long time, to be fair. that's not a short length of time.
In the 30 years you've been here.
That's right. And it feels like it sometimes.
But the idea that I'm reluctant to say it's the home game, but I think Illinois has a higher ceiling, I guess. I don't know. What do you think? I'm
reluctant because so we've talked about this at length as well. And forgive us, one of the great trappings of season preview podcasts is some of it does wind up just being a regurgitation of storylines that we've been going through in the offseason. But the one area where I think you're going to be able to reliably say Iowa will test Indiana is the lines of scrimmage. That no matter how good or bad the offense, no matter where the quarterback situation is up to, obviously Iowa has made a fairly dramatic, cultural change. Well, we'll see how dramatic, the cultural change at offensive coordinator. And yes, it does feel like the sort of game where if I told you Indiana scores 31 points, you'd have a hard time imagining Indiana losing. But, the great Achilles heel for this team last year was teams that could make life difficult in the trenches. And I know they had some injuries. I think Indiana loses both starting guards by the end of the year. You could kind of see, I don't think it's letting the cat out of the bag or anything, because I'm pretty sure I tweeted it when I saw it. Like, Mikhail Kamara came out into a basketball game in December in a sling. So it's clear, like, he wasn't fully healthy by the time or maybe it was January. But, point is, postseason, it's clear you're talking about even some players that were on the field weren't necessarily fully healthy. So I want to respect where Indiana really needed to get better to go to the next level. And I think there's a decent chance they did, especially along the offensive line in particular. Having said that, though, number one, your point about Iowa's offense is completely valid. Like, until we see Iowa able to score,
until we see it, like, you can't
at this level, you just can't assume it anymore. And number two, if you're buying Illinois, and like, at least to a certain extent, I am, like, they won 10 games last year. Like, that really shouldn't be minimized. And, I didn't think they had like a serious playoff candidacy, but we spent a whole bunch of time debating all these 9-win SEC teams. And it's sort of like, well, here's a 9-win Big Ten team that did some pretty nice things as well. If you're buying Illinois, you're buying experience, and you're buying the idea that Illinois can't be rattled. Illinois, there's nowhere they can go where they're going to be outworked, where they're going to be out-hustled, where you're going to be able to scare them out of the game, essentially. And I think that, to me, is why, if I'm having this conversation, like, I think I've got to go with Illinois, is because if I am an Illinois believer and a Bielema believer, a believer, we'll figure it out. We'll workshop it by week 4. But what? But if I am buying what Illinois is selling, then I am doing so on the back of the experience that would make yes, it's sold out, but would make even what, if Indiana's undefeated and if Illinois is undefeated, will be a feral Memorial Stadium. Maybe not as much of a difference maker as it might be for a team that didn't have the experience. Does that make sense?
The Iowa game is not at night, correct? It's other 3 time slots at noon.
Yes, noon, 3:30 or 4.
It's noon, 3 or 4. So it's not a night game. So those,
you don't get that Kinnick, that sort of legendary Kinnick vibe thing. The other question I have, and I'm framing this negatively, not like. I'm framing this negatively because, listen, we're both picking them to go 10-2. So we have to find holes. We can't, we think they're going to be really good, which means that the only way to really sort of dig into what this team is to question whether or not we can find reasons why it might not be what we think it is. What is the next most likely loss, if there is one, for you on this schedule?
Well, I think it's one of those 2 games, or after those 2, because
after the 4 that everyone's kind of looking at in this, in saying these are the big 4 that make this a more difficult schedule than last year. Is there another game that concerns you? I have one.
I'll tell you the one.
It's only a mild concern, but I have one.
I think it's UCLA. Interestingly enough.
Okay, I can see
that. Nico, and I'm not going to butcher his last name.
I am Avea.
Has the biggest upside of any quarterback, maybe on the even out of anybody they face at quarterback, in terms of maybe his potential and how he's being talked about. They got Tino, obviously, and his first time as a coordinator, but we saw how he kind of resonated with quarterbacks, and he'll know Cignetti a little bit and tendencies, and that makes for an interesting chess match. And we've talked about this off air. I left that UCLA game thinking that they were good, that UCLA team was dreadful, and that they were in real big trouble. And then what did they lose their next? Let me pull this up here real quick. So they lost 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 straight after that. But then Deshaun Foster sort of pulled him out of that tailspin and actually, finished 5-7 with wins over at Rutgers, at Nebraska, and Iowa. And look, he was a first-year coach, and he figured it out a little bit at the end. And then obviously made some huge changes, put his stamp sort of on the team because obviously he was thrown in a tough situation. And now I think he, this is his coaching staff now, and I think he feels better about it. And so I think with sort of all of that, it's an interesting team. It's an interesting matchup. Obviously, they're coming from the West Coast, but to me, quarterback's so important. And the coaching job he did last year really impressed me because I just thought that was a team that, especially as that losing streak picked up steam and how they got just steamrolled by Indiana and put up no fight. I was like, man, that team's left for dead. And it was just the opposite. So that would be my pick. And I believe you have your mute.
There we go. Mine would be Wisconsin. And listen, I think there's every chance if you look at Wisconsin's resume that they're going to be just completely dead by the time they get to Indiana. But if they're not, Wisconsin is basically trying to sort of do the we're going to go back to being Wisconsin thing. They tried what they call it the dairy raid, the air raid. We're gonna be modern. We're gonna throw the ball. It just did not work culturally at all, and they're going to try and go back to sort of being Wisconsin. And there's every chance it's too late. And this schedule in particular is going to be just incredibly unforgiving. But the flip side is,
but they had a stretch last year that was basically the same. Their last 5 games were just absolutely brutal, and they just threw the towel. And so
this does feel a little bit. I don't think Luke Fickell gets fired after this year, but this does feel a little bit like the year where it gets baked in. You know what I mean? Where it becomes really hard to recover from. And I think if the flip side is if Wisconsin gets a little bit of momentum behind them, they can pull into town with maybe a couple losses in mid-November and say, hey, look at some of these wins we got. We could be a fringe playoff team if we can grab one more quality win on the road. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think Luke Fickell's a really good coach. It surprised me the way that it's gone for him there. And I just think if there is kind of one last gasp for Wisconsin, then it's going to have to show through this year. Because if it doesn't, then again, I think it starts to kind of push in a bad direction. But I think if there is that much life in that program, then the flip side is they could come in with a fair bit of momentum and confidence that might make a game like that a little bit tricky, because Indiana, we just talked about, Indiana gets Oregon on the other side of Penn State. It gets Penn State on the other side of Ohio State. Well, Wisconsin gets Indiana on the other side of Penn State. So, and that's senior day. That's the last home game of the season. I mean, I don't think it's going to happen, but that's the one that I just kind of penciled and just thought if the seasons go kind of funky in ways we don't expect, that might be one where I think Indiana has a little trouble. Let's move to. I
will say one point about Wisconsin. It is hard to flip the switch, though, when you do radically different. Air raid is a very specific skill set you're recruiting for, and now you're doing the other way. To do that in one season and do it right and well, that's a challenge.
I think the counter argument is that basically the culture they had there was for the other thing. It was for the thing that they were going back to.
Yeah, but you were trying to bring in players to match the air raids. Yes, culturally it's a better fit and it'll be easy, but I mean it's more just the talent that they had that you're trying to adapt to a new thing.
Bold predictions. I don't want to do all 5. Because I want to give people a reason to go to indystar.com/sports and heraldtimesonline.com and read our bold predictions. But if you would be willing, as a teaser, to maybe pick out your boldest, what do you think your boldest prediction for the season to come would be?
Well, it's my last one because it went a step further than your less than bold predictions, that they would win a playoff game.
Yeah, I actually think they'll win a playoff game too.
Oh, you didn't put it in writing. It doesn't count.
Well, no, all right. You want me to lay it out? Here's what they're going to do. They're going to go 10-2. They're going to draw an SEC team on the road. They're going to go.
That's what I have in my predictions. You didn't write it
and
down.
Then they're going to. And then no, I did not read your
bonus.
predictions. I didn't read your predictions. And then they're going to lose. Then they're going to lose the. Well, I guess I don't know which games are the semifinal or the. That'd be the quarterfinals this year. They're going to lose whatever quarterfinal bowl game they go to. They're going to finish 11-3. That is what I believe is going to happen.
Yeah, I didn't name the SEC team, but I said essentially that will be their breakthrough moment. They'll get their win over an SEC foe.
What SEC team do you think would, in this hypothetical that sounds like, every IU fan's sort of absolute dream? Which SEC team losing to Indiana, and that would be a home game for said SEC team? Which SEC team losing to Indiana do you think would make like the sort of Indiana brained living rent free in SEC fans' minds? Which team would the Schadenfreude be strongest if Indiana won the game?
It'd be Alabama, because they were sort of pushing the narrative last year about they belonged above Indiana, right?
Yeah,
and
I think
their schedules have been sort of the point of comparison for a lot of people. I don't know. I just felt like they've been, and obviously the storylines connected with that game with Kalen DeBoer there, but I think that would be the team. Like, I mean, sure, knocking off Georgia would be just like a banner day for the program.
That was the other one. That was the other one I was going to mention, is because Georgia has become the standard bearer for that conference, and Kirby has, like, quietly, you look around, Kirby is what Saban was.
But I'm projecting it out like that. If Texas and Georgia, the realistic slot there would be maybe Alabama's a step below them, and then Alabama's
or Ole Miss, yeah.
And so so if you're talking about those next tier teams, like, sure, it's going to be it would be, if you're an IU fan, any day of the week you take a win over Texas and Georgia, and it'd be like the greatest day in program history. But if you're talking about where I think they slot at, who would be the best opponent, what would be the most meaningful win, Alabama would be, I think the biggest.
What was I going to say? What would be the best day in my beat history is taking you to Mama's Boy in Athens for breakfast the day of the Indiana-Georgia playoff game. So I feel like I can't pick making the playoff. So I'm trying to think my next. You always say my predictions aren't that bold, but I would point out that I predicted they'd win more games last year than you did. So I was willing to go further out over my skis and was repaid in faith. So maybe you should look in a mirror once in a while. Maybe you should make some bold predictions into a mirror before you make them on this podcast. What's Dad doing in the background? He's just making some bold predictions.
Making bold predictions.
I will throw it out that's like it's kind of specific, but it's a double barrel prediction that's going to lead conveniently into the over-unders, which I think is what we're going to discuss next. That Omar Cooper is going to be an all Big Ten receiver this year, but that he's going to do it.
Can I have a point of order on this?
Well, we'll see what it is before I grant it to you.
So when you say all Big Ten, you mean the top 3 teams in that honorable mention?
Let's say top 3. Yeah, top 3.
Because if it's only honorable mention, like these, that's not bold, and even the
let's say top 3. Let's say top 3. Yeah, not honorable mention. Not receiving votes. Top 3. First, second, or third team from the slot, which I would argue is not the easiest thing in the world to do, because often these are stats driven, sort of selections, and the boundary receiver just gets the most targets a lot of the time, and the chance for the biggest chunk plays. The double barrel prediction is that number 1, EJ Williams, who we may well discuss here in a little bit, is going to stay healthy and productive enough that Indiana can move Cooper inside and keep him there a lot of the time. And number 2 is that Cooper, who is almost exclusively, in terms of, I'm sure he's lined up in the slot some, but his role has been boundary receiver when he's been on the field consistently across the course of his college career. Cooper moves inside and is first, second, or third team all Big Ten at some point, or at one of those 3 teams this season. So the 2 predictions are, 1, that EJ Williams stays productive enough for Indiana to be able to do that, and that 2, Cooper goes inside, and we see as the season, maybe not immediately, but as the season goes along, Indiana develops a similar relationship in the slot and its offense this year to what it had last year. But instead of splitting it between 3 players, it's pretty much just one, with maybe a second player that comes in and does a little bit of the Miles Cross. I don't know if people picked up on this last year, but like if Miles Cross was in the slot last year, I felt like 85% of the time it was a run play. That's probably over-exaggerating a little bit. But
Keyshawn Williams was their guy in the red zone.
What?
Keyshawn Williams was their guy in the red zone.
Cross was the one that they were designing all of like the trap blocking for. Like he'd come in motion and then he'd kind of dive into a trap block in the line. The other two were much more pass catchers than they were blockers. I think Cooper holds down in this bold future, holds down that slot role and really makes it his own.
He's played 45. I mean, per Pro Football Focus, 45 snaps in the slot.
All right, this season is bold. How many snaps has he played overall,
though? 247 pass, 377 total pass snaps.
Okay, so it's pretty bold. As bold goes.
11.9% career average or percentage. That's where he's lined up. So 10%.
Should we use this as a convenient sort of thread into our over-unders? Because I know EJ Williams featured prominently in your over-unders. These are just a few that Mike pulled out, and personally, I think it's well, okay. We'll start with EJ Williams. Over under 24 catches. So his single season high is 24 in like his across his entire, his single season high is 23. That was in 2023, his first year in Indiana. He has never once in any of the other 3 seasons he's played in college I'm sorry. You're right. I was missing the COVID year. The COVID year, his freshman year, 24 catches. Only once in the following 4 years did he have more than 9 in a single season. He obviously comes from Clemson looking for a bigger role. He gets to Indiana in 2023. That is the second most catches and the second most yards in a single season he's ever had. Last year, he only has 2 receptions for 49 yards. A lot of that is health-based. We've talked about his sort of his journey and the fact that, it's been as much about staying on the field as anything else. And he went in the portal last year thinking he might want to go somewhere else. Indiana kind of convinced him to come back. And actually, is it fair to say he's probably a starter on Saturday, assuming he's healthy? Yeah. So EJ Williams, your guy. I think it's well established by now. EJ Williams is your guy. Over under 24.5.
It's tough. I mean, you forgot to mention his freshman year. I mean, really he had 9 catches for 125 yards in the playoffs, and so that was sort of like the optimistic, like he was just going to skyrocket up and be like the next big thing and big prospect, and then never found it. And I think the encouraging sign is that the only thing Curt Cignetti said negative was he was a little inconsistent at the start of fall camp, but he was still on the field, and so I think that's like the big deal, because like Curt Cignetti said, basically after the first 4 practices of spring last year, like they never really got a chance to really see what he could do. And then obviously, held on to the red shirt and that year of eligibility. It is tough though, because, you mentioned Omar Cooper. They've got the pass catching backs this year. They've got an option at tight end, which we'll talk about a little bit. And then I think another guy we're going to talk about, Surratt's due for a big year. So I'm going to go under.
I'm going to go over, and that's just purely based on the fact that 5 different Indiana players had at least 27 catches last year.
But I think he could be a guy that has like 18 catches for like an average like 18 yards per catch and still, have an impact, be a high a downfield guy. But
sure. But if we're talking about let's live in a world for a moment where things change a little bit. Maybe you do see more pass catching for the backs. I think that probably eats into the receivers' catches, but I think that probably also eats into the tight ends' catches, because you have a different dynamic at tight end this year between Riley Nowakowski and Holden Stays. And I also think if I'm following on from my prediction that Omar Cooper winds up kind of almost getting 2 different players, like becomes almost 2 players in one of, maybe Miles Price, Keyshawn Williams a little bit this season. And it's it's not that clean, but you understand what I'm saying. Then
he
that still
absorbs their
leaves
production into one.
right. That still leaves, if you're just looking at last year's numbers purely, Miles Cross had 27, Omar Cooper had 28. And listen, between them, Tyson Lawton and Justice Ellison had 25. So it's, the backs weren't heavily involved in the pass game, but I don't think we can go. I don't think Roman Himby's catching 7 passes a game either. So I think, personally, I think the offense stays generally what it was, with some, like in terms of structure, with basically just some roles getting spread out in different directions. And I think EJ Williams, provided he stays healthy, and that's that's the gamble I think I'm taking, is less that the offense moves away from him and more that he stays healthy. I'm taking the over on EJ Williams, 24.5. He sets a career high in catches this year. I don't know how far over he gets. We may be talking 27, 28. I may be sweating it, first round of the playoff.
Yeah, I do think it's going to be close. Like, I still think he could hit 20, but I just don't know that 25. Because, like I said, when you're kind of trying to game out the production, Surratt gets maybe 15, 20 more. Cooper gets 15 more. The backs get 15 more. And maybe you don't have 6 guys with 20. Maybe it's 4. And so that's kind of how I see it. But I think it'll be close. But I think he'll be productive. And like you said, I think he will have some impactful moments for this team, like he did back as a freshman for Clemson.
This one I think is going to be quick. Fernando Mendoza over under 3,200 passing yards.
You go first. I went first last time.
Over.
You think over?
That's probably the easiest over for me. Because we both just said they're going to play 14 games.
That's true.
We also said the only way they play 14 games is if Mendoza is excellent. I
see that. I said I think that that path is available to them if they get baseline.
Okay,
but based on the number of games, it still probably gets them over 3,200.
Even still, Curtis Rourke passed for 3,042 last year. If he only played in 12 games.
Right.
So now we have Mendoza playing in 13 or 14. Yeah, I mean, yes. I think it's over.
Yes, personally. Over as well. And just so you know, I thought about setting it higher. Like Nate Sudfeld's record is 3,573. You covered the team during that season, and so do you think he has a shot? This isn't official. This doesn't count. We're going to try to revisit these at the end of the year. But do you think he has a shot at that record?
A shot, yes. That offense was just insanely good. That was a generational offense. I think that offense put 5 different players in the pros, maybe 6. Now, some of them were like training camps, bounced around, practice squads, but still, for Indiana, that group was remarkable. I think there were a couple Pro Bowls in there in the end. And the other thing too that's worth saying is,
were they a less balanced offense in terms of run?
No, they were remarkably balanced. They were the first team since Eddie George, Ohio State, to have a 3,500-yard passer, a 1,000-yard receiver, and 2,000-yard backs.
Oh wow!
They were incredibly balanced. Now, the 1,000-yard backs thing was because Jordan Howard got banged up midway through the year and then kind of came back, then got banged up again. But the point is, Divine Redding still had 1,000 yards. The other issue is that team had to win some shootouts. Like, that defense was literally one of the worst in the country that year. Like, they were in, I think the 110s in yards allowed per game. So, like, Indiana, that was the year they started 4-0, and then they lost 6 in a row, and then they won their last 2. Like, they lost to Iowa, I think 35-27. They lost to Michigan in double overtime in a game where it was like 49-41 or 49-47 in Indiana.
They lost to Rutgers 55-52. I just
they were up 27 points in that game in the third quarter. And Rutgers
lost the whole game to Duke 44-41. The opener to Southern Illinois.
Or was it? No, it was 25 points. They were up 52-27, and Rutgers ripped off 4 straight touchdowns and won the game. That was homecoming.
The opener was against Southern Illinois, and they squeaked out a 48-47 victory.
So because Southern Illinois dropped a 2-point conversion in the end zone to win the game on the last play. Like, that was, they had to win. They had to win games that way, and so I think it is very Is it possible? Yes, in part because in this hypothetical future, Mendoza gets at least one more game than Sudfeld did. And Sudfeld also was a little bit banged up. I mean, he missed, I don't think he played against Penn State that season. So that gives you a sense for he put up those numbers and still probably could have done more if he'd been healthy all year. But Indiana also needed to win games that way. Like they got into shootouts routinely because their defense just wasn't any good. And so they threw the ball all over the field, and they kind of went after it the way they did because they really didn't have much choice, frankly. And so I think this is going to be a more balanced offense. And I think there's also a world too where there are more games where Mendoza hits a point where Indiana is able to say, okay, that's enough. We're just going to run out the clock or put it in Alberto or whatever.
And just to put some context, 3,200 would be third most all time. Second most right now is Richard Lega, 3,362 yards the year after.
Richard Lego, like the toy.
Lego, I like that.
I mean, he might be listening. Richard is a fan of the show.
He hit it the next year in 2016. He's second all time. So
you said Mikel Kamara. You left me with an option here, and I'm going to choose the more robust one because this is a statistic that is hard for me to imagine breaking. You said over under 9.5 sacks, which I don't see how. I mean, I would be surprised if he doesn't get double digits again. Does he break the Indiana record? Now, do you have that number immediately at hand? It's Greg Middleton.
17. So I think it was 17. Greg Middleton.
It was 2007. I'll look it up right now. This is on
I have it.
It was Greg Middleton in 2007. I thought
or 16. No, that's why I said, I think, did I have 16 and a half?
No, you didn't. You did not. You just said, does he set the record? So does he get 17 sacks?
Yeah.
I say no.
Sacks in 2007. Yeah.
I say under 16 and a half. So what's the number then? 16 and a half?
Yeah.
Yeah. I say under.
I say under. Yeah.
Because I just think he's going to get so much. Like, I think that there's a chance that Kamara actually finishes.
Well, we got to set it at 15 and a half because if he got 16, he'd tie the record.
Sure. All right. That's fine. I'm probably still going under. I mean, that is also just an enormous number. Like in modern football, when most quarterbacks take most snaps from the shotgun and offenses are designed for the ball to be out of the quarterback's hands within 3 seconds, 16 sacks is just a huge number for any one player to like that. That's not even reflective of the player. It's reflective of the way that the game has changed. The reason we talk about like pass deflections and havoc rate and stuff like that is because defensive line coaches know that you're just not going to have you like pass rushers just aren't going to have the time to get to the quarterback that they once did because the quarterback has already dropped back when he gets the ball. And the ball is designed in a lot of offenses to be delivered a lot faster. So I think under is fairly, to me, that is a fairly, I won't say reliable under because I do think Kamara's a really, really good pass rusher, but I think that is I feel good about that one. Let's put it that way.
And just for context, I mean, he only had 7 sacks combined the next 2 seasons. And I had Kamara hitting 10 as kind of a bold prediction because it's been so rare. I looked up only one player in the Big Ten has consecutive 10 sack seasons in the last 10 years. Guys that have fallen short: Joey Bosa, Chase Young, Abdul Carter. It's just not an easy record. It's not an easy accomplishment, not a record, obviously. It's just not an easy accomplishment. People, got to stay healthy. Teams focus on you. And I still think, I think he'll be disappointed that he wouldn't do it, but getting to 10 sacks would still make him arguably the best pass rusher in Indiana history.
No, I think in my time here, the only players that I would probably measure up next to him at that level would be Nick in terms of being able to do it year on year, would be Nick Mangieri and Jamie Curlew. And Curlew had a double-digit sack season. Curlew, the next year after Middleton, had a double-digit sack season in, what was that, 2008.
2008.
But Curlew was
six in program history. So
yeah, I think he had something like 7.5 in 2007, and then he had double digits in 2008. And Mangieri never hit double digits, but he was at least kind of like a fairly, like, he was a steady, reliable player for a solid period of time. I think I think those are probably the only two players that I would put up next to Kamara, especially if we're talking about back-to-back double-digit sack seasons. I can get it out.
The closest in history for Indiana to get to Greg Farrell had 8 sacks separated by season. So in 89-91, then Adewale Ogunle had 10 sacks in 97 and 8.5 in 96. So that was the closest anybody's ever come to back-to-back in Indiana program history to 10 sacks.
Greg Farrell, also a listener to this show. So hope he's listening. Hope you're doing well out there, Greg. All right. Your turn on this one. And I'm going to speed these up a little bit because we are running a little long. I mean, this is a season preview show, so it's all right if it's a little longer, but we don't want to go on forever. Indiana offense over under 39.5 points a game. You go first.
I think under. We talked, not to be a dead horse, but the nature of the schedule. I just think they're not going to be able to sort of hit over 40 as frequently now. I mean, maybe they make up for it by scoring 70 in multiple non-conference games and against Purdue again, which I wouldn't rule out. And maybe they pad their way there. But I think it's going to be tough to get that number. Doesn't mean it's like anything like super, I think maybe still over 35-ish, around there is probably where I peg them. But 39.5, I've got under.
I did really quick.
We're doing math? You're doing math?
I'm doing quick math. I've got them at, and I somehow screwed it up. So I'm going to do it really quickly while we're talking here.
A little more math.
I screwed up my order of operations. What I did was I went back and I looked at my my predictions for their game by game results essentially, and I said, where do I think they're going to fall based on? And listen, I did not have some massive scientific, like genius level way of getting to this number, but I had them scoring. If you look at my game by game predictions, if I'm doing this math right, and I did it real quick, so it's possible I didn't, but I had them scoring 446 total points, which is 37.2 points per game. So I think I'm with you. I think under. I don't think maybe far under, but I still think under. Let's do defense too. I don't know if we'll do all these over-unders because again we are running a little long. But you said over defense over under 19.5 points per game allowed. I'm not going to go back and do the math off of my. I mean, maybe I'll do it.
Good. I want to see more.
Maybe I'll do it while you're talking. Part of me wants to say under because I actually think this defense is going to be really, really good again. But again, you've got not just some tougher opponents, but some tougher environments you're going to have to go into. And to your point, I think Michigan State's going to be better offensively this year. I think UCLA is going to be better offensively this year. I think it's possible Purdue scores against Indiana, which inflates that scoring average ever so slightly. So in good conscience, I probably say over 19.5 points per game.
Well, now I'm looking at my predictions. So now I have to go with what I put. I'm not even doing the math. Clearly I had them under on my scheduling predictions for the points, the 39, and I clearly have them under on defense because I don't have very many teams running up the score on them, even in those 2 losses. So, I mean, they've really got to hammer, like I said, Indiana State, Kennesaw State, and Purdue to make this number work. But I'll go under because I got to be consistent. And they do have those 3 outliers where those 3 teams in theory could combine for 0 points.
Which 3?
Indiana State, Kennesaw State, and Purdue.
That's tough company to be keeping. Do you want me to do the on-air admin here real quick and tell you what my
I mean, if you got it, I mean, we can spend 10 minutes on that instead of doing the others. It's good.
Well, hold on. I got to do the math. I should have come prepared with this, but I was getting yelled at by my children. All right, here we go. I only have them with 1 shutout. How many shutouts did you have them with this year? Like, how many did you project?
I think just 1.
Just 1. I had Indiana State as
State, and I think in Kennesaw State with 6, so maybe 2 field goals or touchdown and a missed extra point. I had Purdue at 6 too, so same level.
I had Purdue at 17. I had Purdue and ODU both at 17. I have them. Oh, you'll like this. I have them averaging 19.8 points per game allowed.
Couldn't have worked out better. It was worth the wait. That was
worth the wait. And I tell you what, by the way, we need to revisit these predictions at the end, not for whether we're right or wrong, but whether or not you should be a Vegas odds maker, because you are you are like we've come really close on a few of these different projections. All right, let's do 3 more. Okay. Number 1, can't be bothered with the running backs. Sorry, guys. Byron Baldwin over under 299.5 snaps. I mean, I want you to answer that first, mostly because I want to know how you got to that number specifically.
It was an average of about 25 per game, and I looked at sort of the All-Americans last year for freshmen. There was obviously some regular starters, but a couple of them, 300, 400 snaps, part-time players, or got to a starting job sort of later in the year. So sort of middle of the road, like not necessarily a full-time starter all the time, but a contributor and sort of a rotational player. This was obviously, I did this list before today's court hearing, so maybe that changes the equation and makes it easy to go over. I think it's over either way, but I just think it speaks to the idea that because Hemby, as impactful as he was, I think he had like 170, and then sort of like the last 4 or 5 weeks was averaging over 20 snaps a game. Didn't even come close to this number. And Curt Cignetti has sort of said like doesn't love playing freshmen, that there is the developmental or true freshmen, and so I think it just represents a number that he was a guy that they relied on and part of the defense. Not just a part-time sort of like a package player like Elijah Hardy was. I meant Hardy, sorry, last year. Hardy with 170 snaps. So that's where I got the number, and I think it's over, especially after today's decision.
Really quickly, John Jacobs asked, did the freshman quarterback from Center Grove last year redshirted transfer, as I don't see his name on the current roster? Tyler Cherry suffered a very serious knee injury during Notre Dame prep last season. It was I believe we reported this. It was a non-contact injury. He is working his way back from that, but I think this is a sort of a consequence of roster caps. At the moment, he is not on roster. He's essentially a student coach, and there is, if he can get healthy again, and my understanding is it was a pretty substantial knee injury. If he can get healthy again, there is, per my understanding, a path back to the roster for him. I think this is more of like a roster caps thing, and the fact that if you can only have 105 on the roster, some guys are going to have to get moved around and at times get moved off. I will go over to on Byron Baldwin. Indiana didn't really rotate when I say they didn't rotate their safeties, they didn't really. Amari Farrell and Sean Asbury each played over 700 snaps. Even more than that, if you go through just like in the Big Ten, I'm on the Big Ten's PFF page. Josh Sanguinetti played 266 as essentially kind of the swing backup at safety. Like almost nobody else in the top 50. In fact, I think it is nobody else in the top 50 in snaps last season at safety in the Big Ten played under 300 snaps. So I just don't if Baldwin is going to play the way that we think he's going to play, that just have the role that, especially as you say after today, I just think it's going to be a very easy number for him to hit ultimately because of just kind of the form. Number one, the way the position works, and number two, the form that this staff has. All right. Over under 14.5 sacks allowed by the offensive line. I say over. And my thought process is I think Indiana, 41 sacks for Fernando Mendoza was a lot last year. I know offensive line play was a real issue at Cal. That doesn't just happen because of an offensive line, though. And I wouldn't be shocked if Indiana has a couple of high sack totals early in the season that are maybe a little bit the result of Mendoza trying to get his timing down. Like Curt Cignetti has said to me, and others, it's not like it's exclusive to me. one of the big
have a conversation about this.
One of the biggest sort of points of growth for Mendoza has been trusting his offensive line and trusting his timing and not feeling like he's got to speed up or rush. I just wouldn't be stunned if there are 1 or 2 games here early in the season, especially like in Iowa, for example, where Indiana winds up with a really high sack total, like high in a single game. And the thing is, all it takes is 3 games of 3 sacks, and you're over halfway there. So I say over.
Yeah, and just pulling up some of the numbers. What was it last year? I just had it. 21 they allowed last year. And then the year before that, 25. I mean, they've been trending in sort of the right direction. 38 in 2022 before Bob Bostad's arrival. It's obviously about close to 1 per game if we haven't gone into the playoffs like we did. I'll just to split a little bit of a difference. I'll go under so we can disagree on a couple more and see what we have. But I think it's around there. Like you said, if they have a couple bad games, I mean, they could blow past it. But the idea is that they shouldn't. That they've upgraded this group, and I think they have a lot of confidence in sort of the upgrades that they made and the improvements. Carter Smith, Ray Lynch, Drew Evans now back obviously from injury. Maybe it gets screwed up because the backups come in a couple of these games early and throw it off. Maybe I should say starters allowed to try to protect myself, but we'll go under.
No, Vegas, you can't do that.
Can't do that.
It doesn't work in Vegas. Last one, I'm going to leave Elijah Surratt's receiving yards just because I feel like we're both going to say the same thing on that. This is more of a stylistic thing. Holden stays over under 19.5 catches. I'm going to say under. And the reason why I'm going to say under is because I think elements of this offense are going to change. And I know, and where I might get burned on this is Stays is pretty widely recognized as the better pass catcher between him and Riley Nowakowski. And I know that Fernando Mendoza has form for a good relationship with his tight end if you look at his years at Cal. But I also think this offense, like, coaches can talk about fitting offenses to personnel and putting players in the best position to succeed. I also think, though, sometimes coaches can kind of run home to mama a little bit, can get a little bit small C conservative and sort of say, this is what I know works. And Nowakowski is undoubtedly the better blocker. Zach Horton's perimeter blocking was one of the most underappreciated keys to why Indiana's offense worked so well last season. It was the number one reason why those slot receivers had this, not the only one, but the number one reason why those slot receivers had the success they did, because Horton was so good blocking on the perimeter, blocking tunnel screens, underneath screens, that kind of stuff, that I just think Indiana, at the end of the day, I'm not even sure it's going to reflect as much on Stays. Like, I could see a world where Holden Stays has like 12 catches and still winds up in an NFL camp because he does enough that people are like, yeah, I see some talent there, but they just go to Nowakowski because they think that a tight end that does what Nowakowski does wins games. And it winds up being less a reflection on Stays and more a reflection on, no, this is the offense. This is how it works for us. And some things will change a little bit, but this is not going to. And so I think Stays under 19.5 catches.
Yeah, and I hate to agree just on all these. I mean, we split on a couple, but I just thought these were interesting discussion points. The Stays, it's exactly for what you kind of discussed, that if he has over 19.5, it represents a very major shift in what Curt Cignetti's done in his career in terms of backing the guy at tight end at that position that's the better blocker and going with him for primarily throughout the season. And so it would just, rotating those guys and trying to find matchups would just be a very different look than what he did last year and then what he's done in the past. And Stays, to your point, you talk about getting an NFL camp. I mean, the chances he's gone from Notre Dame to Tennessee, now to Indiana, 3 Power 4 programs that have all seen Power 4 level programs that have all seen that upside, right? Like that he's got that pass catch ability that's just, what they want from a tight end if you want to get him involved in the pass game. But I just think the nature of what Curt Cignetti's done I'm just more comfortable going under unless unless something change, unless there's a big change, like you said, stylistically, where they're rotating players at that position, like they hadn't before.
Let's bring this in for a landing, because we've been talking for almost 80 minutes. I'm trying to think of maybe a best, like we've talked so much, I think, about what feel like best case scenarios. I don't want to end on like a worst case scenario, but I guess maybe the better way to ask it is just, what to you is the biggest, well, yes, the worst case scenario. What to you is we look back at the end of the season, and whether it's gone well or it's gone poorly relative to present expectations as they are on August 27th, what do you think is, assuming that there are a variety of reasons why the season's gone as it's gone, what is the biggest reason? What is like the number one reason why, whether it's gone well or it's gone poorly? Is it quarterback play? Is it, defensive depth development? Is it just sheerly that Indiana has been playing? Because, like, John Jacobs says here, like, worst case scenario, Mendoza has a season-ending injury game one. Well, sure. I'm talking about stuff that we can foresee. I'm not talking about, the years we've seen Indiana lose 3 scholarship quarterbacks to injury. I'm talking about stuff we can foresee. Is it simply that the schedule is just much tougher, and it turns out that Indiana's not quite prepared to navigate that as well as they need to? Or is it the other way around? Is it that Fernando Mendoza is going to be that good? Or is it that, that Indiana's going to have more playmaking depth on defense than anybody else in the conference, maybe even Ohio State? Like, Ohio State's breaking in like 8 new starters on defense. It's not unreasonable to think Indiana might have the best pass rusher, linebacker, and corner in the conference. Like, that's not an unreasonable take. So I'm just curious, like, if you can boil it down and you could say, like, there's one thing that, for better or worse, has the biggest influence on this season, what is it? I know what I'm going to say, but I'm just curious what you are.
Well, a couple of things. I think we've talked about, I think the easiest way to see a path above what we've talked about is Mendoza is a potential number one pick. I mean, that's the clearest, easiest path to sort of 11-1 Big Ten champions, bye in the playoffs. He's in the top 5, and it's a no doubter, right? Like, he's that guy, no question. That's the easiest path, I think, to the best case, like next level than what they did last year. A couple things about the opposite. Like, you mentioned injuries are hard to foresee, but, like, look, sometimes it's luck, and they avoided, Curtis Rourke, obviously, we didn't know about the knee, and he managed to play through it. He had the finger for the one game, and Drew Evans was sort of like the only other major injury they had the entire season. And that's a really impressive feat. And maybe it is what he does in the offseason that sets these up. And Derek Owings, a lot of this now is like that's a science. And maybe they've cracked the code in terms of keeping guys healthy and keeping guys fresh. But I mean, generally, you're going to lose more guys than that. And because, like, I think depth, it speaks to the idea that depth is probably this team's biggest weakness, that when you're turning over a roster over these 2 years, like they have, it's just hard because there's really no middle, right? You've got these good transfers, you got the good returners, you got some young guys that they're trying, a couple, that get seasoning, Mario Landino, Hardy, Charlie Becker, guys that they like, but it's just there's not enough depth across the roster that I feel like they can survive 3 or 4, like you mentioned, at one position, obviously quarterback, but I was saying 3 or 4 starters going down for like significant time, I think would be tough for this team to overcome, because they just don't. It's just a nature of kind of where they are at and trying to rebuild things. In 2 years, that might not be the case. The other way, I think that they don't reach their potential and sort of maybe go back to just being a bowl team, is that, like, they had an incredible hit rate in the transfer portal last year, like incredible in terms of the guy, like some fell off like that, but you never even saw them play. Like, they were never even counted on. And like the guys that they sort of backed right from the start, like all of them hit basically, really. And so, like, do they miss on Wheeler and Ratcliffe? That could throw off this whole team, right? like the idea that you're relying on just them to be your replacements at defensive tackle, two fifth-year guys, replacing Weston Carpenter. If they just missed at that position, or they missed it, Mekhi Jackson and a couple of the skill players, Lee Beebe, just aren't what they couldn't make the leap to, like the James Madison kids did. Because look, it was an incredible percentage, and I think that defined their season last year was why they were so successful. But it's not easy, because it was that easy, every team would do it, right? Just transfer, bring in 20 transfers that were great, and they'd be just done. And so that to me are the two things. You can't predict injuries, but like they were remarkably healthy last year, and you saw it even on the offensive line a couple of years ago. What was it, Bedford that year, where he went down and they were constantly replacing guys? You just don't have the depth, and so like those things happen beyond just the quarterback getting injured. And I just don't think that, and it's not a fault of Cignetti. It's just when you're replacing I think it's like 90 guys in 2 years, it's hard to sort of worried about the third guy at each position.
Yeah, I think so. Like the two things you singled out were kind of like 2A and 2B for me. And I will be wrong about this if Mendoza is the number 1 overall pick in the draft. Like if he's that player for 13, 14, 15 games, I'll be wrong about this, because he will be such a difference maker that Indiana will go up to a level that even I think we don't necessarily think they have in them. I agree with you on injuries, and I've heard people say Indiana got incredibly lucky with injuries last year. I don't think you're incredibly lucky when you lose both your starting guards, because remember, Nick Kidwell was supposed to be the starting right guard, and he gets injured in the preseason, and then Drew Evans goes down the week of the Michigan game, and your quarterback, as good as he was, everyone had to admit after the season, was more physically limited than anybody wanted to let on while the season was going on because of the injuries. And you even think about like the way he throws the ball against Ohio State, the way he throws the ball against Notre Dame, the pictures we see of his thumb in the Purdue game and the Notre Dame game, and how swollen it still is and how clearly injured it still is. I thought Indiana had good luck with injuries last year, but they still had to overcome some stuff that probably put a little bit of a ceiling on their season. The other thing I would just say about depth is, like, I don't think anybody has the quality of depth anymore, quite, because players just leave. Because I think even, I mean, again, look at Ohio State, 8 new starters jumping in. Like even at big schools, you just can't hold on to too many. Some guys you can, but you just can't hold on to too many guys for 2 or 3 years of development time.
But the counterpoint to that for an Ohio State, Alabama, Texas,
is that the raw talent of those players is,
and they're recruiting at a higher level, more further down the line than the guys that
no doubt. I'm just saying that the only reason why that wasn't my number one is because I think that is more of an issue across the board than it used to be. My number one is line of scrimmage play, and it was the difference last year for Indiana. It is, even through the attrition that mostly Indiana couldn't do anything about, players just graduated, but even through the attrition, it was as big of a focus, I think, other than quarterback, as any position in terms of development, in terms of portal recruitment, in terms of, where, like, when outside media, TV, print, whoever have come into Bloomington over the last several months, it seems like that has been the area of focus. Is Indiana better along the lines of scrimmage, particularly the offensive line? Because that was where Indiana very clearly lost the Ohio State game, and where Indiana very clearly lost the Notre Dame game. And frankly, let's be fair, could have lost. Maybe it wasn't ever that close to losing, but could have lost the Michigan game as well. And if I think about, we joke about how long I've been on the beat, but what I have always said is the difference between Indiana and the absolute grown-ups table in the Big Ten is line of scrimmage play. I've seen Indiana have quarterbacks that were as good as any in the conference, or running backs that were as good as any in the conference, or receivers, or, frankly, linebackers, even sometimes, as we've talked about, pass rushers. But in terms of both quality and in terms of depth, when the rubbers hit the road, the reason Indiana loses that game at Penn State, the reason Indiana loses that tight one against Michigan, or can't pull off the upset over number 1 Ohio State at home, or whatever, is line of scrimmage play. And for the first time in certainly at least all of my time on this beat, Indiana has earned the right to think of itself as a Big Ten championship contender. And I'm not predicting that they're going to. I've literally not done that. I've predicted they're going to win 10 games, and that I would be shocked if 7-2 in the conference gets them into Indianapolis.
Yeah.
But Indiana has earned the right to at least think about itself that way. And if you had told me 2 years ago, 5 years ago, 10 years ago that would be the case, and you'd said, what is the one step that Indiana has to take to get to that level more than any other, I would have said line of scrimmage play. And I think it ties in.
And honestly,
I think it ties in a little bit to your point about depth and transfers and things like that.
Transfers, yeah.
But if Indiana, you say they had a great hit rate last year. Well, if their hit rate is as good or better this year, which is possible, it is possible with a Pat Coogan, with the Mahalski-Benson kind of dynamic along the right side of the offensive line, with the defensive tackles, with the opposite rush end, where I think Indiana, something that might keep Mikhail Kamara's sack total down is teams double team him, and that opens the lane for Kellen Wyatt or Stephen Daly. But if Indiana has made meaningful improvement along the lines of scrimmage from where it was a year ago, there is a baseline level of production that I expect out of a Curt Cignetti quarterback. Like, even if I wouldn't necessarily think they'd win, 11 or 12 games. But if you told me tomorrow that Alberto Mendoza is going to have to take over halfway through the year, I'd say I bet Cignetti still figures something out enough to win a few games, maybe win a bowl game. Again, I acknowledge and agree with your point about injuries and depth. I just think that's a little bit more of a universal concern than it used to be. The big difference for me is what football will always be about, which is blocking and tackling. And Indiana was demonstrably better there last year than I've seen them in years, particularly on defense. But you could also see where the gap was. When it mattered, you could see where the difference was. And if Indiana has closed that last
gap, because the Notre Dame game was the one.
No. It's much more on offense.
Right, much more on offense. Yeah,
but even even thinking about like an Ohio State game, for example,
because the defensive front destroyed Michigan.
Definitely, and they had the one misfit against Ohio or Notre Dame, but otherwise I thought they were good. Now I would point out Notre Dame is consistently not able to get Notre Dame off the field on third down in some key moments in those games. I also just think, like, even Ohio State. No, the defense didn't lose that game, but there were moments when the defense could have flipped that game. When a negative play.
The Ohio State's the outlier game, because I thought in the other two the defense was not the primary.
I don't even think the defense was the primary problem in the Ohio State. It was 7-7 late in the second quarter, but Indiana's constantly fighting field position and therefore fighting against sort of like Ohio State's talent plus home field advantage. And the defensive line is what could have flipped that, and I think we thought might flip that. If you remember, Ohio State had some injuries along its offensive line, and that never wound up coming into play in that game the way that Indiana needed it to. So, Indiana lost that game in other phases, but it could have given itself more of a chance in that game with better defensive line play as well, I think. And so, in general, that is what I would look at. If Indiana has made the strides that I think it thinks it's made along the lines of scrimmage, then Indiana is going to be in that mix somewhere for, if not the Big Ten title, then at least I think another playoff berth. Let's leave it there. We've gone for more than 90 minutes. Thank you all so much who've joined us tonight. Remember to like and subscribe on the YouTube channel. Remember to check back there. We're going to be putting Curt Cignetti press conference videos there. Player press conference videos there. We'll be putting our post-game thoughts there. We'll have our post-game podcast as usual. So the point is the offerings are only going to get expanded there, and we are going to try and make this. They won't all be 93 minutes long, but we're going to try and make these Wednesday night, kind of the staple. If you want to sort of push a pin into your weekly calendar, mind your banners somewhere around 8:30 or 9 o'clock once everybody's kids are settled in for the evening. For those
listening after the fact, trying to get them up around noon on Thursdays, Thursday mornings each week. Because obviously people might be listening to this tomorrow. The goal will be for those to be up Thursdays each week. We were a little erratic last year.
And then
over under 203. Can we go next time? We'll
no, we're not going 203 podcast. We better be talking about World War II if we're doing that.
Can we watch some of the games you covered, 10 years ago?
I'm never doing that again. He's Mike Niziolek. I'm Zach Osterman for the Herald Times and for Indy Star. Thank you so much for listening. This has been Mind Your Banners for August 27th, 2025. On the other side, we'll see you after some actual football. Take it easy.